Well, hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Raven, and I'm really excited today to be joined by two guests who are both very special people to me. I'll introduce them and we'll hear a little bit about their connection and collaborations and have a great conversation today. So, my guests are Katie Anderson and Isao Yoshino. Katie is the author of a book titled Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, Lessons from Toyota leader Isao Yoshino on a lifetime of continuous learning. So this book is a collaboration. Katie is a leadership coach. We now say published author. Her firm is KBJ Anderson, and you can find her at kbjanderson.com. And so Katie and I have known each other at least a decade.
Yeah. Definitely. It was back when I was at Stanford Children's Hospital many years ago.
Yeah, so we have a lot of professional connections. And Mr. Yoshino, I'm really honored that you are here. I did my first study trip to Japan in 2012, and Mr. Yoshino gave a lecture and had a chance to talk with him at dinner. And he spent nearly 40 years at Toyota working in Japan and in the United States. So Mr. Yoshino, it's great to see you again. And thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you.
And you're coming to us from Japan.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
just south of Toyota City, right?
No, Okazaki City.
Yeah.
It's about 20 miles south from Toyota City.
Yeah. Well, great. So my first guest from Japan. So it's an honor. Thank you for being here. So we'll talk about the book, but I think I know one of the themes from the book is learning from mistakes, as we talk about all the time here on the podcast. So Mr. Yoshino, you have a story that you'd like to tell about something you consider to be a favorite mistake.
Yes. My biggest mistake is already in the book, which Katie wrote, but do you want me to start talking about it?
Yes.
No?
Please.
Okay. Well, actually, I've made so many mistakes in my entire life, and big and small. But actually, the topic I'm going to talk about is almost the biggest one. But it's very interesting experience. It was when was it? I joined Toyota in 1966, a long time ago. And you know what? In Japan, when you hire, actually, we graduate, from university, just start working in April because the school starts in April and end in March. Mm-hmm. So when we graduate from universities in March, then we start working in April. So first 4 months, particularly in Toyota, the first 4 months for the newly hired people will go through the orientation. So it's not that you just go to the certain section and start working. We don't do that. First 4 months is long, 4 months we go through the orientation. And the first month, maybe it's a classroom orientation about the Toyota history and all those things. And based on that, we are sent to the plant because Toyota is a manufacturing company. So we are sent to the plant where they are manufacturing the cars. So we work the same way as the work over there for about 2 months total, 2 times. And so my story is that about my experience working in that plant, because I was assigned to Motomachi plant where the people are manufacturing small size car like Corona. Oh no, not Corona virus, but the Corona, by the way. Anyway, so that was the manufacturing plant, and I was sent to the paint shop. But it's not that I was painting the car body, but I was sent to the preparation office, not office, storage, where we have some paint cans, and we keep it and we put it in the tank, and then the paint is brought into the painting shop. So we have to prepare all those painting. So my job was to put the paint in the tank, and also the solvent. At the time we have to put in 2 different materials. One is paint itself, and another one is solvent. So we have to put into together. So my job is every 2 or 3 hours when the tank is empty, then my job is to put the paint A to the tank mixer, then solvent A, the same material, solvent A to the tank, and then push the button. Then the machine just mix it up and then send it through the pipe to the painting shop. That's my job. Then maybe 2 or 3 hours later, then it's get empty. So I have to do the same thing. And one day, when I finish my work, then I just waiting and taking a look at the document or something. Then, all of a sudden, just people in the painting shops rush to our, storage and ask me, okay, you guys, something is wrong in the painting shop because paint does not stick to the bottle panel. Something is wrong. So then the people came in, and I was new, very new, maybe the first 1 week or so, very, very new. So I was so surprised. Okay, something is wrong. I must have done something wrong. So just people can ask me, oh, okay, what did you do that? Okay, yes, sir. I just put this paint A in the tank. Then I put the solvent A to the tank. Then I take a close look at the label. it was solvent B.
No.
I am not supposed to put that different one, but I did it. I did not notice that. So maybe a couple hours later, it came out. So we found out that I put the wrong solvent in the tank, which creates huge problem. More than 100 cars should be repainted. So I was so shocked. But you know what? What happened next is that they did not blame me for the mistakes. Of course, it was my mistake, but they did not blame me. But instead, they asked me, "How did it happen?" Yes, sir. I just did it what I was being told. However, I pick up the wrong one because there is no site defined somewhere. So I pick up from this corner and put it up, but I pick up the wrong one. Then I explained that. Then the big boss, boss of my storage, is that he said, "Okay, so you pick up the wrong one, but without noticing that you pick up the wrong ones. So it's not necessarily your mistake. It's our mistake because we did not, give you all the detailed instruction, but we just let you do that yourself. So it was our mistake, but don't worry, we have to figure out how to stop the same thing from happening again." So nobody ever blamed me. So I was so shocked that it makes me feel so happy. Okay, these guys did not start blaming me, but they want to just find the real cause of the problem. Of course, the paint manager also came in. So all of the people looking at the same problem, look at the problem and thinking of the same way, how to solve the problem. So I was so happy. And after that, of course, my boss and group leaders just try to segregate in the area of where to store the paint A and paint B. So they learned some lessons out of my big mistake.
Yeah.
And so that was really, really big mistake for me because at the time, what I thought is that, okay, what kind of people are these people? Because usually, they can easily blame me for the big mistake, but they didn't. So what is the thinking behind this? It's because they want to solve the problem because we are not perfect. So we make mistakes. Mistakes happen everywhere, particularly the newcomer like me. So that is what happened to me. And after that experience, I just talk about my mistake with my colleague. Actually, we joined the same company, same timing. So I talk with a friend. This is the mistake I made. What do you think? Okay, don't worry, Yoshino. I did it similar thing in my stamping shop or in other part of their training location. And so several people just said these the same mistakes because we are new. But they received the same reaction, just like I received it. So it's amazing experience for me. So I tried to learn what is the concept behind their attitude, because they are, you cannot get anything out of blaming somebody, but you can get something important, important lesson you can learn out of the mistakes some people made through, discussing everything and going to the real cause of the problem. So that is the core thing that they believe is so important. And so that is really the first, very, very at first stage, I get that experience. So I learned that, okay, this is one of the very, very important culture that Toyota carries.
Right.
And so I was so proud of being part of Toyota, just few weeks, but still, it was a great, great experience for me. That's why I wanted to share this with your people.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a powerful thing to learn so early in your career.
Yes.
It's like some people do not get that opportunity. They get blamed for something, whether they were involved or not. And this is where people learn to blame coworkers or to hide and cover up problems. And that's what prevents learning, and that's what prevents improvement, right?
I remember when we were first starting to work on the book, and we decided to start at the very beginning of Mr. Yoshino's career. And Mr. Yoshino, I remember you laughing as you recalled this memory that you hadn't thought of in years, and how foundational it was for your experience of learning to be a learner and a leader at Toyota. And it's what a powerful story, and what a great mistake, and the response of leaders as well.
Yeah, and my impression is, somebody, I've never worked at Toyota, but I've gotten to know many people who did work at Toyota, and I've pulled up one page from the book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, that says lesson number 2: create the conditions for people to be successful. And I've heard that same idea, slightly different words, from different former Toyota people. And one of those people, Daryl Wilburn, who worked in the United States in Kentucky and San Antonio, I've heard him say it's the leader's responsibility to create a system in which people can be successful. So to me, that's a sign that a culture is very strong when decades later, on a different continent, that same idea is still there within Toyota.
Absolutely. And in fact, we'll dive into this later, probably in the podcast, but how this concept of mistakes and failure and embracing failure as a source of learning was so much of a part of Mr. Yoshino's 40 years at Toyota as well.
Yeah. So, hey, Katie, do you have a story that you want to tell about a favorite mistake?
I do. It took me a little while to think about what story I was going to tell, because, as we all know, we all have so many mistakes. And before we started recording, we were even talking about all the small little mistakes that many of us had made today. But when I was thinking about, for myself, what my favorite mistake was, I wanted to frame it on something that I had learned the most from, and what had been the most impactful for me. And that has to go to a mistake that I have made many, 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 many times. But the story I'm going to tell is the time that this mistake really first revealed itself to me, and how it started me on my path of continuous improvement to be a better leader and coach. So I was in my mid-20s. I was in a place of a career transition. I was living in Australia, where I had just received my master's degree and had been awarded a prestigious academic scholarship. I had been for years rewarded for being the expert problem solver and the expert person, and sharing my opinion was what I was supposed to do. And I made a decision to leave academia and to take a consulting role at a consulting firm in Australia, where I lived for 4 years. And my story is, so paint the picture. I'm in a room with other colleagues at various levels within the firm. This is not a client-facing meeting, but this is a team meeting of different consultants. And I was jumping in and offering my opinion and offering my ideas. And I remember, even this is a visceral feeling I have of, wanting to jump in and just be part of it in my energy. And after that meeting, one of the partners came up to me and said something. The way she delivered the feedback was perhaps not the best, because I always welcome feedback. The words she used didn't necessarily resonate with me at the time. She told me, and I actually debated whether or not I was going to say this on the podcast, because they really frustrated me at the time. But I think these words help, in retrospect, help galvanize me to realize there was something that I needed to change and the mistake that I was really making. She said I was like a bull in a china shop. And just barreling my way through a meeting to get my opinion out. And it took me a while to really sort of accept that. I mean, I heard her, but I didn't really take that on for many years. But that was the beginning for me of my realization that I needed to make a shift for myself, that I was no longer in a role that was pure expert, but I also was in a role where I was working with people and I was helping to develop people and collaborate with people. And so I continued to make the same mistake over and over again, probably not as egregiously. But I, from that point, then I moved back to the United States and I took on a role, which is where you and I met, Mark, at Stanford Children's Hospital, in a continuous improvement internal consulting role. And I realized through my 6 years at Stanford Children's that I needed to shift from being the expert, always telling my ideas and coming up with the solution and offering my opinion, to being more of a coach. And then when I took a more senior leadership role at the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, leading a team of continuous improvement coaches and consultants and working at the executive level, I had a external coach who worked with me, and she was the one who was the real catalyst for me to take some steps back and really reconnect and identify what was my purpose now, what was the intention of my role, and what were the behaviors aligned with that. And it was that year that I really made some transformational change for myself about not jumping in and always giving my opinion. It wasn't about me being right. It wasn't about my ideas. Sometimes it was, but more often than not, it was about me taking a step back and listening, asking questions, and helping other people develop. And this has really become my passion now in my career. And what I see is something that I can really help people with, is making that transition from being an expert or being the one who has the answers to being in a people development role. And how do we successfully navigate that transition and know that sometimes we actually navigate that through each day. Sometimes we are the problem owner or need to be the expert, but many times we should be showing up. And it's less about us being right and more how can we help support someone else being right. So I hate that phrase, bull in a china shop, but it really does. If you think back to me 15 years ago, or maybe it was more than 15 years now at this point, but that was the real beginning of realizing that I was making mistakes and how I wanted to show up and be in the world.
Yeah. And who was it that the feedback came from specifically? Was it a peer? Was it a leader?
That was one of the partners I was working with. So
okay.
yeah. So it was and actually another woman who was one of the few women partners at the firm who gave me that feedback. So
okay. I wasn't necessarily going to ask. I was wondering if gender and expectations played any sort of role in that in terms of behaviors and aggressiveness.
Yeah, well, that was actually one of the reasons I initially, and even to this day, bristle a little bit, because I did have the experience that there may have been some gender expectations in there too, that it was more okay for men to be speaking up. There were more men at the time, and I'm also a I was an American woman in Australian cultural environment at that time. And so I do believe some of that played a role, which is part of the reason I wasn't sure if I wanted to share that story. But at the end of the day, which is a very Australian phrase, when I look back on it, that was the beginning of me really starting to see that I was making a mistake in how I was showing up. If I wanted to be effective in a team environment, if I wanted to be more effective in working with people and really connecting with my purpose, which was to help other people move forward. And so, so there were some things about that. but it was the beginning of my realization of
Yeah.
the mistake and how it was showing up.
Well, I mean, people often say feedback is a gift, but some feedback is more specific or more helpful than other feedback. So in the book, one of the themes is reflection as the key to learning. And if somebody throws a phrase at you like, well, Katie, you're being a bull in a china shop, like, how do you reflect? It would be difficult to reflect on that feedback, other than like maybe some blunt reaction of like, okay, I'll sit and be quiet. But
exactly. Yeah, well, thank you, Mark. You're validating my reaction to that feedback, because there was important feedback to be had, but the delivery and the method of that feedback was not so effective. So, because it could have been said in a more reflective way, that would have been more helpful for me in that moment.
Yeah, and then, like you said, you continued to, as you called it, making that mistake. And then, I mean, what was it? What was the gradual self-discovery over time, perhaps then, in terms of finding the right balance of when to speak up, when to state something, when to ask questions, when to listen?
Yeah, so it was really, some of it happened organically through my own personal experience, and then some of it happened with real intention. But I would say it was a realization that it wasn't sustainable. If I really wanted to be helping this organization create sustainable improvement and really have the people who worked in the workplace have more capability and confidence of continuing to improve the processes we were working on, me going in and sort of behind the scenes doing all the problem solving wasn't actually achieving that outcome. And I had a role in teaching them and a helpful role in guiding them in along the way. But me just doing it all behind the scenes and being the expert who then like swishes away and leaves them with it wasn't helpful. And then it really was when I had a coach who was working with me with purpose and intention, who was very good at asking those questions to help self-awareness. And I'd gone on a journey from that time, but to ask those questions of, who do you want to be? How do you want to be showing up? What outcomes do you want with your people and your organization? And what role do you have by the way that you're acting, and how is that influencing those outcomes?
Yeah.
And so it was putting purposeful practice. And I think sometimes, this is what I help other people work with now, is sometimes it's just the process of some self-awareness. And once you're aware of how you're showing up, it can be quite easy to make changes, because you start being horrified of like, oh my God, I interrupt people all the time. My good friend Karen Ross, she was laughing the other day. She's like, I would never have thought that you were an interrupter. I'm like, that's because I still can be an interrupter, but I work really hard at not interrupting people and not interjecting my own opinion all the time. Certainly to offer it, but to do it in a more constructive and purposeful way.
Yeah.
So,
and Karen Ross, by the way, was guest number 3 in this My Favorite Mistake series. So people can find that in the podcast feed if you want to find that. But I think it's an interesting contrast in the two stories from you, Katie, and from you, Mr. Yoshino. As that page that I had pulled up from the book also says in the header here, as Mr. Yoshino was talking about, not just create the conditions for people to be successful, but then in parentheses, and take responsibility when mistakes happen. So I heard from your story, Mr. Yoshino, that the group leader or others took responsibility for putting you in that position. Katie, it seems like in your situation, that partner wasn't taking responsibility for maybe not having proactively coached you, or the firm not having better expectations around, the mistake's not as straightforward as solvent A versus solvent B either.
Right. Right. I think she probably thought that she was helping create those conditions, but her words maybe didn't help as much in the moment. But they did spur me in retrospect, and kind of it was a wake up call for me that others' experience of how I was showing up was not congruent with my experience of how I wanted to be seen and contribute. So that, I guess, in that way, it was helpful.
Yeah. So it's two stories, I think, for listeners and for myself to kind of reflect on, different leaders reacting to situations differently, and how do we try to create a culture, as you write about in the book, where you're developing people and improving and succeeding as an organization. So before we wrap up, I do want to talk a little bit more the story behind the book. Again, it's leading to. No, I always stumble over this when I talk to Katie about the book. So here's my mistake. And I've got it in front of me, and I still struggle to read it. Katie, hold the book out. Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the book and you can read it for yourself. Learning to lead, leading to learn. Those words are in all capitals, and I still stumble over it. What was that?
I said it's a lot. It's a lot of lead. It's a lot of L's.
Yeah.
Learning, leading, learning.
Yeah. So, Katie, and then I want to ask Mr. Yoshino your reflections on the book. But Katie, what led to this opportunity to write a book, to collaborate with Mr. Yoshino and capture so much of what you've learned and what he's taught others?
Well, some of it was serendipity, that I had the unique opportunity to move to Japan in 2015 for 18 months with my family. And it wasn't for my job, it was for my husband's. But as a lean practitioner and a consultant, very interested in international experiences and also the Toyota production system, I was very thrilled with this. And I met Mr. Yoshino 6 months before we moved to Japan, and he gave me his card and said, look me up when you get down there and I'll take you to Toyota City and we'll do a tour of Toyota. And I really thought that this, and I made my husband take the day off of work. I thought it was going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity. Yeah. And we just had a really wonderful day together, spending time talking. And from that point forward, I jumped on that Shinkansen, the bullet train, take the 90-minute journey down to see Mr. Yoshino many times. And we continued our discussions, and it just evolved. And when I moved back to the US, we continued to talk. And it was actually, I believe it was Mr. Yoshino's idea. So I'd started writing a blog when I moved to Japan, which you were super helpful, Mark, in helping me think about how to get that set up, and some initial just sort of spreading the word about it. Mm-hmm. And I was writing about my conversations with Mr. Yoshino, and he was so generous of saying, anything we talk about, you're welcome to write about on your blog. And people were really interested in our conversations. And so when I moved back to Japan, or back from Japan to the United States, we continued to talk, and I was writing these blog posts, and Mr. Yoshino said, well, maybe we should work on a booklet together. And I was like, well, I think it might be more than a booklet. I kind of had the inkling at that point that writing something more than a blog post was going to take some serious effort.
Right.
And so we said, okay, let's do a book. And we started with purposeful interviews, and it evolved into a much bigger project than I think either of us had imagined. Because I'm so grateful for this experience of getting to work with Mr. Yoshino and really learn so much from him, and the depth of reflection. If we go back to that concept of reflection that he was willing to undertake to share his lessons of success, of failure, of challenge, and of learning. And it was really, really tremendous. So it's super exciting. It's only been about five months. Actually, by the time when this podcast comes out, it'll be the 6-month mark of the book coming out. So that was our journey together. And we're one of the most important relationships in my adult life is with this man. So
yeah. Well, and the book is gotten such a positive reception, and the reviews that people can see on Amazon are very, very positive. And Mr. Yoshino, I wanted to ask you, how does it feel to have so many of your stories from your life, and the stories talk about your goals as a child growing up? Like there's a lot about you in the book. How does that feel?
Well, actually, it's very, very interesting experience to work together with Katie, because this was the first time in my entire life that people keep asking me a lot of questions to me about my life and my childhood and the Toyota life. I've never received any kind of questions from Japanese people. So every time Katie asks some simple question, but it's so profound, so deeper, has so deeper meaning. So it's a very much good trigger for me to look back on my past, and most of the things I talk, she wrote in her book is what I remembered, what I recall, remembering when she asked me. So I just try my best to remember all those memories, which is already hidden somewhere. So it's very, very big trigger. So that is the power of asking effective questions to me. So it was a big trigger. So I learned so much, from my past experience. One more time again, I learned when I experience something, then I learned something at the time, but still, again, I relearned some important lessons out of sharing my stories with Katie. So it was a great experience for me. So again, it's the power of asking effective questions, and it really means a lot to me. And so I really appreciate, and of course, it's not my biography. It's a history of my series of learning. So I really appreciate Katie gave me a chance to look back and relearn some lessons again. So 2 times, new learning 2 times, it's great thing to do in my life.
That's wonderful. So questions, reflections, and learning.
Yes.
A lot better than blame and punishment. Back to the workplace stories.
And I want to add one other thing, Mark. I love the title and focus of this podcast, and it really resonates with so many of the stories stories in the book, but stories from Mr. Yoshino's life. And I like to say that the book, or his experience at Toyota, was bookended by these 2 different experiences. One, which is the story he shared today on the podcast, and the other was at the end of his career, which is a very significant, large business venture that failed. But throughout all of that, the response of leaders was the same around mistakes and failure as a source of learning. And how even the president of Toyota, Mr. Cho, had said to Mr. Yoshino after a pretty challenging many years on working on this project, that we don't blame you for this business failure. We also had responsibility for this. You were new to the business. We were new to the business. And we all have an opportunity for learning. And to me, that just sums up the quote that I start the book off with, which is, I was always trying to ask Mr. Yoshino, like, what's Toyota's secret? How are they such a successful company that's renowned for being its people-centered culture and a culture of learning? And he said, the only secret to Toyota is its attitude towards learning. And that's about learning from mistakes as well as failure, and looking at the process and not just the outcome. And I think that's so critical for all of us to remember. And I want to bring up, you have your Daruma too, that there's a proverb that I learned in Japan about fall down. That says, fall down 7 times, get up 8. And these Japanese Daruma dolls represent that as well. It's about setting a goal and an intention. You fill in the Daruma's eye. This is actually from submitting our manuscript. I have my goal here. But the expectation is you're not going to achieve something with success out of the gates. There's going to be mistakes and failure along the way. Mark's is better, but this one, I do it on my hand. It's not very good, but they're weighted at the bottom, because when you fall down, you need to get up. And that's the perseverance and the grit and the tenacity and the learning. Oh, nice one, Mark. Is how we're going to move towards success. And so mistakes and struggle and failure is part of the learning journey towards success. And so if we can reframe mistakes in a different way and failure in a different way and have a different response when people make mistakes, that's how we're all going to create a better world, really.
Yeah. So we're going to make your book the official book of the podcast here, because that is such a powerful theme and one of the threads through the book. Learning to lead, leading to learn. See, I did better.
Nice work. See, practice with intention.
I should have practiced before we recorded. So I'll get better at hosting. So again, we've been joined by Katie Anderson and Isao Yoshino. Katie, there was an offer that you were going to mention, a downloadable sample from the book. Can you tell the audience about that?
I have a downloadable sample from the book if you haven't had the opportunity to read it. A chapter that describes Mr. Yoshino's the story that he talked about today, as well as some of the introductory parts of the book for you. And you can go to KBJ Anderson / my favorite mistake. So my favorite mistake. So we'll
There's a .com in there too.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I mean, to jump all over you for the mistake.
Yeah, no, okay, all right. So we'll start again.
I'm being a bull in the china shop here.
kbjanderson.com/my favorite mistake. So we'll put that in the notes as well, but you can get that for you there, and we'll have some other specials coming forward. So check out that for some other announcements and opportunities for you to take advantage of.
Great. So yeah, there'll be a clickable link in the show notes or the YouTube comments or the description. People can click on that. So, well, this has been so nice to hear, so your reflections and perspectives on learning from mistakes, both personally and some of the example that we can get from Toyota. So again, the full title of the book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, Lessons from Toyota Leader Isao Yoshino on a Lifetime of Continuous Learning. So Mr. Yoshino, it's been a real honor to have you join us today, and Katie as author of the book. The same. Thank you both for taking time to be here today.
Thank you.
I could say arigato.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.